Hi, Happy New Year. So it's been a long time coming, but I have finally seen Nosferatu. I've been looking forward to this movie pretty much ever since it was announced that it was being made. And if you've been following me on Instagram or TikTok, you probably have seen my posts in the last year, which were inspired by the different trailers and posters that came out leading up to the release. So, needless to say, I was extremely excited to finally go see this last week. I really wanted to go into this movie as blind as possible. I hadn't listened to the soundtrack before I went to see it. I didn't even know how long the duration of the movie was either. But as it was released here on January 1st, which was a bit later than other countries, it was incredibly hard to avoid spoilers. Unfortunately, I did come across a few, including a glimpse of Count Orlok's face, which was pretty frustrating, but it's all right. I've seen the movie now, and that's all that matters. And of course, the mystery surrounding Bill Skarsgård's portrayal of Count Orlok was the major highlight of the film's marketing campaign. And the promotion leading up to the film was incredible. There were so many different events, premieres, and products, including the collaborations. I really love all of the brands that have collaborated for this movie, and the merchandise has been really well executed. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get myself one of those infamous sarcophagus popcorn buckets, as they're not available to ship over this side of the world, which is a shame, but I'll keep trying. But anyway, in this video, I'm going to be taking you along with me to see the movie, and I'll be discussing my thoughts as well as touching on some other topics related to the film. There will be spoiler and non-spoiler chapters, and I'll be letting you know when those are, so don't worry if you haven't seen it yet. Okay, let's go see Nosferatu. So this is the full outfit. My dress is from Lace Made, which was sent to me recently. My belt is from Lively Ghost. It's actually a harness, but it can be worn as a belt. It's the Seance harness. And this bag is from Restyle. My boots are from Foxblood. So I just got home from seeing Nosferatu, and I was planning on talking about my thoughts straight away while they're fresh. But I'm actually not going to do that because I feel so overwhelmed after watching that movie. There were just so many details and things that happened that I didn't really expect. And I need a bit of time to process my thoughts coherently, because if I start talking to you now, I'm probably just going to be blabbing. I'm also planning to go see it again already on the weekend. Definitely not the right time to do it, so I'm going to come back after I've seen it a second time and then do a proper review for you. Okay, so I'm back from seeing Nosferatu a second time, and I'm ready to discuss my thoughts, which have been brewing in my head since the first time I saw it last week. I realize that it's taken me a few days to process my feelings around this movie, And the thing that's most prominent to me is a feeling of sadness. This movie made me pretty sad, but not entirely in a bad way, and I'll get into that as we go on. But before we go into this, I thought I would touch on a bit of a history of the Nosferatu films. I think it's really important to provide some context, and hopefully, this might be helpful to anyone who hasn't seen these yet. So, for those who don't know, the original film was released in 1922, and that it's a silent film. The filmmakers set out to adapt Dracula, but they failed to secure the rights from Stoker's estate. So they decided to just make a film that closely followed the events of the book, but they changed the characters' names and the setting. But unfortunately, the film was a little bit too similar to Dracula, and Bram Stoker's widow, Florence Balcombe, sued for copyright infringement. The court ruled in her favor and ordered all copies of the film to be destroyed, but as often happens with iconic works, some copies survived, and Nosferatu eventually became a cult classic. In the 1979 version, the legality issues surrounding Dracula had obviously changed at that time, as the main characters have very similar names to those of the book. For example, the main character is Lucy and her husband is Jonathan, but the plot from the 1922 version remains the same. So the films have a really interesting and rich history, and I really recommend watching those if you did like the new movie. So I haven't read or watched anyone else's reviews apart from chatting to some friends. We've also been chatting on my Discord Patreon about this, which has been really fun. Because as I mentioned, I really wanted to go into this as blind as possible, and I didn't want to know too many opinions of others because I didn't want it to change the way I thought about the movie going into it. So this first part is going to be spoiler free for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, and then I'll dive in a bit deeper later with some spoilers, but I'll let you know when that will be. I've also added some chapters here so you can see when these start. Okay, let's get into it. So the first thing I want to say about this movie is that it's perfectly and utterly Gothic. I read a lot of Gothic literature. It's my favorite genre, and of course I love vampires. So this really felt like the one that I've been waiting for. On that note, I feel it's essential to discuss the Gothic genre a little bit in relation to this film, because it really checks all of the boxes of classic Gothic archetypes. From the setting of an ancient castle in a foreign country, to the supernatural elements and macabre atmosphere, it really encapsulates everything that defines the genre. And when I think about some of my favorite Gothic books, including The Monk by Matthew Gregory Lewis or The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, the aspects that really stand out to me about those books are the shock I felt and the sense of dread. These stories mix romantic elements with horror, and that creates a really unique emotional intensity. And that same blend is precisely what I love about Gothic fiction and what I think Robert Eggers has achieved with Nosferatu. And aesthetically, I think he absolutely nailed it. I don't think I've ever seen a movie that felt so me, and something that I resonated with so deeply. It's beautifully shot with stunning locations, breathtaking scenery, and of course, incredible costumes. The attention to detail in the color palette was also amazing, especially how it seamlessly complements what the characters are wearing. And that created such a cohesive and immersive visual experience. It really is a visually stunning film, and the soundtrack enhanced it perfectly. I actually just ordered the vinyl finally. I didn't listen to the soundtrack before the movie, as I mentioned, because I wanted to go in mostly blind. I'm really looking forward to adding it to my collection soon. I think the storyline of this movie was also excellent. If you've seen either of the previous films, then it probably won't surprise you much. But there are some notable differences that I'll touch on when we get to the spoiler section of the video. Overall, I think this movie is an incredible achievement, and I really wish we had more movies like this. Although I'd been avoiding anything online related to this movie in fear of spoilers, I understand there have been some discussions and mixed reviews about the content of this film, as some people have found it maybe to be a bit too much or not what they expected. And this is something I witnessed firsthand on both occasions from other people in the cinema when I went to see it. For example, as I was leaving the first time I saw it, I overheard someone behind me say, "That was effed up." But I loved hearing that reaction because that's precisely the point. These reactions to Nosferatu really remind me of what seemed to happen when The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, which is regarded as the first Gothic novel, was published back in the 1700s. Even at the height of its popularity, it was still viewed as unsophisticated. And the response to Nosferatu kind of feels like a modern parallel to that historical perception of the Gothic genre. I think perhaps some viewers may have gone into this film expecting either a romantic vampire movie, a straightforward horror movie with a lot of gore, or maybe even a mix of the two. But this is something entirely different. It's purely Gothic, and that distinction makes it stand apart in a way that some people may not immediately appreciate. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you need to know everything about the history of Nosferatu, that you must read Dracula, or even be a fan of Gothic movies and books to enjoy this film. I do believe a wide range of audiences can connect with it. So, whether you're deeply interested in these themes or not, I think it's definitely worth watching. Okay, so now I'm going to dive into the spoiler section of my review. So, if you haven't seen the movie yet, consider this your warning. So, getting into the spoilers, let's start right off the bat, pun intended, with Count Orlok. His voice and appearance are so shocking and distinct that I really don't believe they could have marketed this movie in any other way. And one of the most talked about aspects of his design is his moustache, which is pretty controversial. When I saw it, it immediately made me think of Vlad III, also known as Vlad the Impaler. There's been some debate I've seen online about whether Orlok is Vlad, but I don't think it's so straightforward. Obviously, Dracula is a very important topic to me, so I wanted to do a little bit of research on this. To go fully into this, though, would probably require a whole other video because I could really go down the rabbit hole with this topic alone. But to touch on it briefly, of course, we associate Bram Stoker's vampire Dracula with Vlad the Impaler, and by that extension, Count Orlok is the same figure. But really, Bram Stoker never explicitly said that they are one and the same. And when I researched whether Robert Eggers was intentionally making this connection, I came across this quote from an interview. And yes, Dracula did have a moustache in the book. So while this statement may seem to connect Count Orlok to Vlad the Impaler, it seems to be more of a cultural and historical reference rather than a direct claim that Count Orlok is Vlad the Impaler himself. Personally, I really liked the addition of the mustache. I thought it was so different, and I think it's very historically accurate, so it was a good decision to add that. But returning to Count Orlok's appearance, I really appreciated the deliberate pacing of his reveal in the movie. As Thomas arrives at the castle, the lighting, the shadows, and his growing fear really build up the tension as they first meet. And throughout the movie, Count Orlok remains shrouded in darkness for the majority of the film. And that really added to his mystique until, of course, the climatic final scene in The Rising Sun, where we see his full form unveiled, which is a haunting and visceral portrayal of an undead corpse. He really embodies the folkloric vampire of Eastern European lore, which is something rarely portrayed in film. And this truly made me so happy. While I do love the otherworldly, beautiful, and Rice-style vampires, it's really refreshing to see one that is genuinely so terrifying. And that's another thing I really loved about Count Orlok. Unlike in, for example, the Dracula 1992 adaptation played by Gary Oldman, who, by the way, also had a moustache, in that movie he starts off as this creepy old character, but he transforms into a younger, more handsome man by the time he reaches his destination. While I was watching this, I thought maybe Count Orlok was going to do the same. And I'm really glad that they didn't go with that route because he remains consistently monstrous. His background also tied in with the Romanian superstitions and lore really also made me so happy, especially with the Scholomance. A few years ago, I read Emily Gerard's essay Transylvanian Superstitions when I discovered that it was a main source of inspiration for Bram Stoker when writing Dracula. And there were a few things from that seem to be directly pulled into this movie. One example is the Scholomance, which is a legendary school of black magic in Romanian folklore. It's particularly associated with the Transylvanian region. According to accounts, this school was said to be run by the devil, and its students were known as the Scolomanari. It's a fascinating piece of folklore, and I highly recommend exploring it further. Other superstitions I noticed in this movie were the Virgin crossing the grave, which we see when Thomas is traveling to the castle and he witnesses that ritual performed on what is a suspected vampire. The act of a virgin crossing the grave of a suspected vampire was thought to have protective powers, and this belief stems from the idea that virgins who are considered pure could repel or reveal the presence of evil. So if a virgin crossed a vampire's grave, they wouldn't be able to rise. We then also hear the townspeople discussing looking for a tail or cloven feet when they open the coffin, as the vampires or strigoi are often depicted with unusual physical traits in Eastern European folklore. I've seen Nicholas Hoult in a few other things, but I think he really went to another level in Nosferatu. His ability to show sheer terror and panic was great, and I really felt so scared for him during the movie. I quite like Thomas as a character in general, and it really seemed like he was willing to do anything to make Ellen happy, even if that didn't turn out so well in the end. I also loved Thomas and Ellen's relationship, and Ellen as a character, as Lily Rose Depp, really surprised me as a whole. I'd never seen her act in anything before, so I really didn't know what to expect from her, but I think she did an amazing job. Isabelle Adjani, who played the same part in the 1979 Nosferatu film, is an amazing actress. And when I read that Lily Rose was inspired by her performance in Possession, which is an incredible and unhinged movie, I was worried she wouldn't be able to reach the same level. But she did. She was really great in this movie. Her expressions in particular was so heartbreaking and emotive and just so raw. Really liked her backstory as well, and how she already had a history with Count Orlok. It was cool that she possessed foresight and what seemed to be other psychic abilities, and she unknowingly summoned him as a lonely child, and he became obsessed with her. However, I don't consider this to be a romance between the two characters. I think Thomas is her true love, and Orlok's obsession with Ellen just seems to stem from a combination of her unique psychic abilities, her vulnerability as a child when she first summoned him, and his own predatory nature as a vampire. I think Ellen's foresight and powers drew him to her, as she's unlike anything he had ever counted before, and he tells her this when we see them meet for the first time properly in the movie. Additionally, Ellen's act of summoning Count Orlok creates a supernatural bond between them, and that marks her as someone special in his eyes. For him, obsession replaces love. He is driven by a possessive, consuming desire to control rather than form any genuine emotional connection, and he even says so himself in the movie that he is incapable of loving. I think this dynamic highlights his predatory nature and deepens the Gothic themes of power, manipulation, and the dangerous allure of the supernatural. What makes Ellen stand out even more is that she's not only the protagonist, but she's also the heroine at the forefront of the story, and that's another thing I love about Gothic movies and books. In mostly all of my favorite books, there's always a female heroine. I find that really empowering. She courageously sacrifices herself to save everyone, though only Professor von Franz truly understands her intentions. And the professor himself is a pretty complex character. Willem Dafoe is obviously a great, amazing actor. I really like him in general, and he did a great job in this. He made me laugh quite a few times as well. I liked that he was a little bit unhinged. I thought that had a great dynamic to his character. It seemed like he really cared for Ellen's welfare, but he was willing to sacrifice her to put an end to Orlok and the plague for the greater good. And of course, we have to talk about that final scene. It left me feeling deeply emotional. When the sun rises and Count Orlok begins to break down, Ellen reaching out to hold his face is such a poignant moment. There's so much meaning in this simple gesture, and I think it really speaks to her compassion, her courage, and her bravery. And that final shot of the lilacs surrounding them, it's something I'll never forget. It's so hauntingly beautiful, and I think it's a perfect encapsulation of the film's themes. It's beautiful, yet it's grotesque. It's a fine balance, but it's executed so well. This was a particular scene that seemed to draw a lot of reaction for the people sitting around me both times I saw it, as I think some people found it a bit shocking or disturbing, but personally, I thought it was an incredibly powerful moment and such a beautiful way to finish the film. I really do think Nosferatu is well on its way to becoming one of my favorite all time movies. I would like to go see it again as soon as possible. I really can't stop thinking about it, and I've been listening to the soundtrack a lot. Let me know if you've seen Nosferatu yet and what your thoughts were. As always, I'd like to say a big thank you to my Patreon members. We've been discussing Nosferatu a lot, and quite a few of us have already seen it, which has been fun. We'll also be starting our read for January soon, so if you'd like to join us, I've added a link below. I hope you enjoyed my little review and the thoughts that I've shared. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.